My name is Harper, and am 32 years old. The moment I saw those photos on social media, my entire world shattered into 1,000 pieces. There, on my phone screen, was a massive family reunion happening at my late father's house, the house I legally owned. Balloons filled the backyard, a DJ spun music, and at least 50 relatives laughed and celebrated together. My mother Patricia stood front and center, arm around my brother Garrett, both of them beaming like royalty holding court. I scrolled through image after image, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped my phone. They had planned this for months, invited everyone, catered expensive food, and deliberately excluded me from my own property. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife ever could. As I stared at their smiling faces, something inside me shifted from hurt to ice-cold fury. They wanted to play family without me? Fine. I would show them exactly what happens when you cross the wrong person. Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from right now. Drop your location in the comments below. And if you have ever dealt with toxic family members who thought they could walk all over you, go ahead and hit that like button. Make sure to subscribe because what happens next is absolutely wild, and you will not want to miss how I handled this betrayal. Trust me, this gets so much better, or worse, depending on whose side you are on. Let's get into it. To understand how we got here, I need to take you back 18 months to the day my father Roland died. He was only 63 when a sudden heart attack took him from us without warning. One morning he was working in his garden, and by that afternoon he was gone. The shock of losing him devastated me in ways I still cannot fully describe. My father had been my rock, my one true supporter in a family that always made me feel like an outsider looking in. In the months before his death, he had grown increasingly distant from my mother, Patricia, spending more time with me, taking me to lunch, asking about my career as an architectural consultant. I cherished those moments, though I never understood why he seemed so urgently determined to reconnect with me specifically. Then came the will reading. I sat in the attorney's office, still numb from grief, expecting the usual division of assets between my mother, my brother Garrett, and myself. Instead, the attorney cleared his throat and read words that changed everything. My father had left the family home, a stunning 4-bedroom craftsman in Portland's desirable Laurelhurst neighborhood, worth $2.1 million, solely to me. Not split between us, not held in trust, just mine. Complete ownership. The silence in that room was deafening for about 3 seconds before my mother exploded into screaming fury. She lunged across the desk, face red and twisted with rage, shrieking that I must have manipulated Roland, that I had poisoned him against his own wife, that I was a conniving witch who had stolen what rightfully belonged to her. Garrett sat beside her, eerily silent, his calculating eyes fixed on me with an expression I could not quite read but that sent chills down my spine. The house itself was beautiful, a piece of family history spanning 30 years. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, a backyard that bloomed with roses every spring, and enough space for the large family gatherings we used to host back when things were different. Back when I was still allowed to be part of the family. The attorney explained that my father had been very specific in his instructions. The house was mine alone. My mother could contest the will if she wished, but everything was legally airtight. She did contest it, of course, hiring an expensive attorney and dragging the process out for 6 months. Every legal challenge failed. The will stood firm. I owned the house outright. Despite my legal right to take possession immediately, guilt gnawed at me. My mother was grieving, or at least I thought she was. She put on quite the performance, weeping about being made homeless, about losing her husband and now her home in one cruel blow. So I made an offer I would come to deeply regret. I told her she could stay in the house rent-free for 1 year while she figured out her next steps. I thought I was being generous, compassionate. the bigger person. She thanked me with tears streaming down her face, hugging me tight and telling me I was such a good daughter. I actually believed her gratitude was real. What a fool I was. To fully understand the dynamics at play, you need to know about Garrett. My brother, 3 years older than me at 35, had always been the golden child in our family. From the moment he was born, my mother treated him like he hung the moon and stars. He could do no wrong in her eyes. When he failed out of college twice, she made excuses. When his business ventures collapsed one after another, she blamed his partners, the economy, bad luck, anything except his own incompetence. When he went through 3 divorces by age 33, she insisted the women were gold diggers who did not appreciate what a catch he was. Meanwhile, I put myself through college without asking for a penny, built a successful career through hard work, and received nothing but criticism for being too independent, too career-focused, too selfish for not making family my priority. Garrett had a pattern I recognized all too well. He would start some business with money borrowed from our parents, promising this time would be different. He would operate for 6 months to a year, spending lavishly on himself while neglecting actual business operations. Then everything would collapse, he would declare bankruptcy, and he would come crawling back to Roland and Patricia for another bailout. My father had enabled this cycle for years, but something shifted in his final 2 years. He started refusing Garrett's requests for money. He started questioning why a grown man could not support himself. He started recognizing, finally, that my mother's favoritism had created a monster of entitlement who would never stand on his own 2 feet. That shift in my father's perspective caused major friction in my parents' marriage. My mother accused Roland of abandoning his own son. The arguments got heated enough that neighbors complained about the noise. This was the family dynamic into which I stepped when I inherited the house. I should have seen the warning signs immediately when my mother started redecorating without asking my permission. She changed the living room paint from the soft cream my father loved to a garish teal she preferred. She replaced furniture, claiming it was too painful to look at Roland's favorite chair. When I gently reminded her that the house was mine and I would appreciate being consulted on major changes, she cried and said I was being cruel to a grieving widow who just needed to feel some control over her life. I backed down, not wanting to be the villain she painted me as. Then Garrett moved in, claiming his latest divorce left him temporarily without a place to stay. Temporarily turned into permanent. He took over the master bedroom, the one that should have been my mother's. She did not complain. They seemed to have their own little setup, acting like co-owners of a property neither of them legally possessed. The small disrespects piled up like stones building a wall between us. They changed the locks without giving me new keys, claiming it was for security after a supposed break-in that I suspected never happened. They stopped answering my calls, responding only via text, and only when they felt like it. When I tried to visit what was legally my property, they made me feel like an intruder. My mother would sigh heavily and make comments about how she could not relax in her own home anymore. Garrett would position himself physically between me and rooms I wanted to see, arms crossed, expression hostile. I felt my patience wearing dangerously thin, but I kept telling myself to endure just a bit longer for my father's memory. He would have wanted me to take care of his wife, even if she had never taken care of me. That belief kept me trapped in a cycle of acceptance I should have broken much sooner. It was a Tuesday morning, perfectly ordinary until it was not. I sat in my downtown condo with my coffee, scrolling through Instagram before starting work calls, when a post from my distant cousin Diane appeared in my feed. The caption read, "Amazing Carlson family reunion. So good to see everyone." The photo showed an absolutely massive gathering in a backyard I recognized instantly. My backyard. The backyard of the house I owned. At least 50 people crowded into the space, which had been transformed with professional decorations. Balloon arches in gold and white framed the patio. Tables draped with elegant linens held catered food displays that must have cost thousands of dollars. A DJ booth was set up near the fence, and in the center of it all stood my mother and Garrett, surrounded by relatives I had not seen in years, everyone laughing and celebrating. My heart stopped. I stared at the screen, unable to process what I was seeing. I had not been invited. I had not even been told this reunion was happening. They had planned and executed a massive family event at my property without including me at all. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I navigated to Facebook with trembling fingers, desperate to understand the scope of what had happened. Post after post appeared as I scrolled. Aunt Lorraine had shared multiple photos with the caption, "Patricia throws the best parties. Thanks for hosting, sis." Uncle Marshall had tagged himself at my address with his entire family, 6 people I recognized from past holidays. Cousins I had not spoken to since childhood posted selfies in my living room, my kitchen, my father's old study. The comments beneath each post thanked Patricia and Garrett for their wonderful hospitality, for bringing the family together, for creating such special memories. Hundreds of comments. Not one single mention of my name. Not one tag. Not one acknowledgement that I existed or that this property belonged to me. It was as if I had been erased from the family completely. I clicked through to the event page and felt my stomach drop even further. The reunion had been planned for at least 4 months based on the earliest posts in the planning thread. My mother had created a private Facebook group called Carlson Family Reunion 2024, and it had 87 members. I was not one of them. I read through the planning discussions with growing horror, debates about catering options, discussions about whether to hire a photographer, arguments about the playlist for the DJ. My mother had posted updates about preparing the house, about how excited she was to host everyone, about how meaningful it was to bring the family together in the home where so many memories had been made. She spoke as if she owned it, as if she had every right to host a party for nearly 100 people without asking the actual property owner. The emotional devastation hit me in waves. First came shock, the numb disbelief that this could actually be happening. Then came the hurt, the deep soul-crushing pain of being excluded so deliberately by my own mother and brother. Finally came the rage, white-hot, and all-consuming, burning away everything else until only fury remained. I could not breathe properly. My chest tightened and my vision narrowed. I recognized the signs of a panic attack and tried to employ the breathing techniques my therapist had taught me, but nothing worked. I stumbled to my bathroom and vomited from the sheer stress. After washing my face with cold water, I called the one person I knew would understand. Sloane had been my best friend since college, the sister I chose rather than the family I was born into. She answered on the second ring, and I barely managed to choke out what had happened before dissolving into sobs. Sloane listened to everything, her breathing growing sharper as I described the posts, the party, the months of planning I had been excluded from. When I finally finished, she was silent for a long moment before speaking in a voice tight with controlled anger. "That is beyond disrespectful, Harper. That is psychological warfare. They are deliberately hurting you, and they are doing it publicly to humiliate you in front of your entire extended family." Her words validated what I felt but had been afraid to name. This was not an oversight. This was not a miscommunication. This was calculated cruelty designed to put me in my place and show me exactly how little I mattered to them. Sloane continued, "You need to call them right now and find out what the hell they think they are doing." I tried calling my mother first. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. A third time. Voicemail. She was actively rejecting my calls while hosting a party at my house. I moved on to Garrett, expecting the same result, but to my surprise he actually answered. Background noise flooded through the speaker, music and laughter and the sounds of a party in full swing. He sounded drunk and very happy when he said hello. I asked him what was going on, why there was a party at the house, why I had not been invited. His tone changed instantly from jovial to hostile. He told me I had some nerve calling him, that I should mind my own business, and before I could respond he hung up on me. I tried calling back. He had blocked my number. The realization settled over me like ice water. They had deliberately excluded me, and they did not even have the decency to feel ashamed about it. Then I remembered something. 6 months earlier, concerned about my mother and Garrett living in the house unsupervised, I had installed Ring doorbell cameras at the front and back entrances. I pulled up the app on my phone, intending to check the current footage, and discovered that all the cameras showed offline. They had been disabled. I scrolled back through the saved footage from previous weeks and found the moment when Garrett had physically removed the cameras, looking directly into the lens with a smirk before yanking them off the wall. But before he destroyed my ability to monitor the property, I had weeks of recorded footage. I watched with growing horror as my mother and Garrett planned the reunion in conversations caught on audio. I heard Garrett say, "Clear as day, Harper will not find out, and even if she does, what can she do? Mom lives here, she has rights." My mother had laughed and agreed, adding that I had gotten too big for my britches and needed to be reminded of my place in this family. I made the 40-minute drive from my downtown condo to the Laurelhurst house, shaking with rage the entire way. My knuckles turned white from gripping the steering wheel. I ran 3 yellow lights I normally would have stopped for. Part of me knew showing up in this emotional state was probably a mistake, but a larger part of me could not stop myself. I needed to look them in the eyes. I needed them to know that I knew what they had done. When I turned onto the street, cars lined both sides for an entire block. Family members I recognized were loading leftovers into their vehicles, calling out goodbyes to each other, promising to do this again soon. Some noticed me as I parked and walked toward the house. I saw them whisper to each other, pointing in my direction. I walked straight past them, up the front steps I had climbed 1,000 times as a child, and used my key to unlock the door I legally owned. The moment I stepped inside, conversation stopped. At least 30 people still remained in the living room and kitchen areas, and every single one of them turned to stare at me. The silence stretched uncomfortably as I stood in the entryway of my own house feeling like an intruder. Then my mother's face appeared from the kitchen, and when she saw me, her expression was not guilt or shame or embarrassment. It was irritation, pure annoyance that I had dared to show up. She walked toward me with her arms crossed and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Harper, what are you doing here? This is a private family event." The emphasis she placed on the word "you" cut like a blade. I felt every eye in the room on me as I tried to keep my voice steady. "This is my house, Mom," I said, hating how my voice shook despite my best efforts to sound strong. "You are hosting a party at my house without inviting me? Without even telling me?" My mother's face rearranged itself into an expression of wounded innocence. The same look she had perfected over decades of manipulating people into feeling sorry for her. Before she could respond, Garrett stepped forward from where he had been standing near the kitchen. He moved with aggressive intent, positioning himself between me and our mother like a guard dog protecting its owner. His eyes were bloodshot and I could smell alcohol on his breath from several feet away. "You are making a scene," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You should leave. Now." I looked around the room at relatives I had known my entire life. Aunt Lorraine stood near the fireplace, whispering something to Uncle Marshall. Both of them looked away when I tried to make eye contact. Cousin Diane had her phone out and was clearly recording this confrontation, probably planning to post it online later with her own twisted narrative. Other cousins I had played with as a child suddenly found the floor very interesting to look at. Not one person spoke up in my defense. Not one person acknowledged that I had every right to be there. The silence of their complicity hurt almost as much as my mother's original betrayal. My mother switched tactics seamlessly, her eyes welling with tears that appeared on command. "After everything I have done for you," she said, her voice breaking in all the right places, "you begrudge me one afternoon with my family? Your father just died, Harper. I needed this. I needed to feel connected to people who actually care about me instead of just seeing me as an obstacle to an inheritance." The accusation hit its mark perfectly. Several relatives nodded sympathetically. I heard someone mutter that I should be ashamed of myself. Garrett pressed his advantage, stepping closer to me in a way that felt physically threatening. "Dad would be ashamed of how greedy you have become over this house," he said. "He gave you everything and you cannot even let Mom have one day of happiness." I tried to explain. I tried to tell them that I owned the house, that I had never been informed about this reunion, that hosting a massive party at someone else's property without permission was wrong regardless of family relationships. But my mother talked over me, her voice rising to drown mine out. "I sent you an invitation weeks ago," she declared, looking around at the gathered relatives as if calling them as witnesses. "You must have ignored it. You have made it very clear that you want nothing to do with this family anymore." It was a complete lie. I had received no invitation, no text, no call, nothing. But she said it with such conviction that I could see doubt creeping into the expressions of people watching us. Maybe Harper did get an invitation and ignored it. Maybe she is the problem here. Maybe Patricia really is the victim. I felt my composure cracking. "You are lying," I shouted, louder than I intended, and the room recoiled slightly. "You deliberately cut me out. You planned this for months and you made sure I would not know about it." My voice broke on the last words as tears started streaming down my face. I hated crying in front of them, hated giving them the satisfaction of seeing me break down, but I could not help it. Garrett moved even closer, close enough that I could feel his breath on my face. "You need to leave NO, he repeated, and this time it was not a suggestion. It was a command backed by the threat of physical force. Uncle Marshall appeared at my elbow, not roughly but firmly. "Just go, Harper," he said quietly. "You are embarrassing yourself. This is not the time or place." I found myself being escorted to the door of my own house by my uncle, while my mother sobbed dramatically in the background about how cruel I was being to her. I stood on the front lawn, tears running down my face, while the party resumed inside as if I had never been there at all. Music started playing again. I heard laughter. Neighbors had come out onto their porches to watch the commotion, and I felt the weight of their stares. I made it to my car and sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes, crying so hard I could barely see. My phone buzzed repeatedly. Sloan had been texting, asking if I was okay, asking what happened. I could not even form words to respond. Finally, Sloan called. "Where are you? Are you okay? Talk to me, Harper." I managed to choke out what had happened, the public humiliation, the gaslighting, the way every single family member had either actively participated in hurting me or passively allowed it to happen. Sloan listened and then said in a voice I had never heard from her before, cold and absolutely certain, "You are done being the doormat. You understand me. You are done." Something in her tone cut through my despair. She was right. I had spent 32 years trying to earn love from people who would never give it. I had spent 18 months being generous to a mother who repaid me with cruelty. I wiped my face and said, "I am done being the doormat." "Good," Sloan said. "Now what are you going to do about it?" I looked at the house through my rear view mirror, at the lights glowing warm in the windows, at the silhouettes of people celebrating inside. "They want this house so badly," I said, feeling something hard and decisive crystallizing in my chest. They can watch me take it away from them. Sloane was quiet for a moment before she laughed, sharp and satisfied. There is my girl. Burn it down, Harper, metaphorically speaking. Burn it all down. The next morning I woke up with swollen eyes and a pounding headache, but also with clarity I had not felt in months. I called in sick to work, which I almost never did, and spent the first hour researching real estate attorneys in Portland. I needed someone who specialized in property law and who had a reputation for being aggressive when necessary. I found Douglas Whitman, a partner at a well-respected firm with reviews praising his no-nonsense approach and his track record of winning seemingly impossible cases. I called his office as soon as they opened and explained my situation to his paralegal. To my surprise, Douglas himself called me back within an hour. I met with Douglas that same afternoon in his downtown office. He was in his 50s, graying at the temples, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I told him everything: the inheritance, the will, the verbal agreement to let my mother stay rent-free for 1 year, the party, the exclusion, the public humiliation, the property damage I had started to notice on previous visits. Douglas listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Miss Carlson, you are the sole legal owner of this property, correct?" I nodded. "And the agreement for your mother to stay there was verbal, not written into any contract?" I nodded again. "Then you have every legal right to sell that house, to evict your mother and brother, or to reclaim the property for your own use. The 1-year grace period you offered was voluntary on your part. It was not legally binding. It was a kindness, and kindness can be revoked when it is being abused." Douglas explained that my mother was legally classified as a tenant at will, which meant I could terminate her tenancy with 30 days written notice. If she refused to leave after that period, I could file for formal eviction through the courts. The process might take a few months depending on how much she fought it, but the outcome was certain. She had no legal claim to the property whatsoever. Hearing him say it so matter-of-factly helped me feel less guilty about what I was planning. This was not cruelty. This was me enforcing my legal rights over property I owned. Douglas then suggested we run a full property records check, just to make sure there were no surprises waiting for us. I agreed, and what we discovered made my blood run cold. 2 months earlier, my mother had attempted to file an adverse possession claim on the house. Adverse possession is a legal doctrine where someone can claim ownership of property they have occupied for a certain period of time without the owner's objection. In Oregon, the requirement is 10 years of continuous occupation. My mother had lived in the house for 30 years, but she had never been the legal owner. My father had been, and now I was. Her claim was nonsense legally, but the fact that she had tried it showed me just how far she was willing to go. The claim had been rejected immediately by the county, but seeing it there in black and white on the records search made something clear to me. This was not just about hurt feelings or family drama. My mother was actively trying to steal my house through whatever means she could find. Then Douglas found something even worse. 3 weeks earlier, Garrett had attempted to take out a home equity loan against the property using forged documents that showed him as an owner. He had created fake deed papers listing himself as co-owner with me, signed my name himself, and submitted everything to a mortgage company. Fortunately, the bank had done due diligence and discovered the fraud before approving anything. They had flagged it and reported it, though apparently no criminal charges had been filed. Douglas looked up from the report and said, "Your brother attempted to commit mortgage fraud and identity theft. You could press charges if you wanted." The idea tempted me, but I knew that if I went after Garrett criminally, it would cement me as the villain in my family's story forever. I wanted to be free of them, not tied to them through lengthy court proceedings. My plan started to take shape. I had 2 options as Douglas laid them out. Option 1 was to evict my mother and Garrett, then either keep the house for myself or rent it out for income. Option 2 was to sell the house, take the money, and cut ties with my family completely. The cleanest break possible. No ongoing connection to property they felt entitled to. No risk of them trying future legal schemes. Just a final sale, a wire transfer, and the freedom to build a life entirely separate from their toxicity. I chose option 2 without hesitation. Douglas nodded approvingly and connected me with a high-end realtor he knew personally. A woman named Simone Chen who specialized in luxury properties in desirable Portland neighborhoods. Simone met me at a coffee shop that afternoon. She was impeccably dressed, sharp, and had clearly done her homework before our meeting, because she already knew the address and had pulled comparable sales in the area. That Laurelhurst location is gold right now, she told me. The market is incredibly hot. Homes are selling for over asking price regularly, sometimes way over. Based on the square footage, the lot size, and recent renovations I see in the county records, I would list this at $2.2 million and expect a bidding war. My father had bought the house 30 years ago for $300,000. The appreciation alone was staggering. Simone continued, "If you are serious about selling, I can have professional photos done within a week and get it listed immediately. Properties like this do not stay on the market long." I told Simone I was absolutely serious but that I needed to handle the eviction first. She understood completely, having dealt with similar situations before. We agreed that I would get back to her once the property was vacant and repaired. Repairs? I thought, remembering the damage I had noticed on recent visits. I would need to document everything and potentially sue for damages. Douglas had already advised me on that front. Take extensive photos and videos of any destruction. Get contractor estimates for repairs. Build an airtight case. My mother and brother were going to learn that actions have consequences. The preparation phase moved quickly. Douglas drafted a formal 30-day eviction notice that outlined my legal rights as property owner and the termination of my mother's tenancy at will. The notice was served personally by Douglas himself, who showed up at the house with a witness and handed the documents directly to my mother. Her reaction, which Douglas described to me later, involved screaming, crying, and threats to sue me for elder abuse. None of it mattered legally. The clock started ticking on her 30 days. My mother's text messages started immediately. "You ungrateful witch. Your father is rolling in his grave. I hope you are proud of yourself for making your own mother homeless. You are dead to me." I did not respond. Garrett's reaction was more direct and more frightening. He showed up at my condo building that evening, drunk and screaming in the lobby. He pounded on the security door, yelling that I was a thief and a liar, and that he was going to make me pay for what I was doing to our mother. The building security guard, a retired police officer named Frank, intervened and escorted Garrett out while I watched on the security camera feed from my unit. Frank suggested I file a police report, which I did. I also filed for a restraining order against Garrett the next morning. The hearing was granted based on the police report, the security footage, and Garrett's history of instability. The family pressure campaign began in earnest. Aunt Lorraine called and texted repeatedly, telling me I was cruel and heartless for throwing my poor grieving mother out on the street. Uncle Marshall sent long emails about family loyalty and how disappointed my father would be in my choices. Cousin Diane started a social media campaign, posting vague booked messages about family members who value money over love, who betray their own blood for greed, who will end up alone and miserable because of their selfishness. I knew she was talking about me even though she never used my name. Other relatives piled on in the comments, agreeing that some people just have no decency anymore. I blocked them all systematically. Every family member who came at me with manipulation and guilt rather than asking for my side of the story got blocked on every platform. Sloan supported me through all of it, reminding me constantly that I was doing the right thing. The emotional toll was heavy despite my determination. I started having nightmares about my father. In the dreams, he would look at me with disappointment and ask why I was being so cruel to my mother. I would try to explain, but he would turn away from me, shaking his head. I woke up from these nightmares crying, convinced that I was betraying his memory. My therapist, Dr. Amanda Reeves, helped me work through the guilt during our sessions. She pointed out that my father had left the house to me specifically for a reason, that he had known what my mother was like, and that honoring his wishes by protecting what he had given me was not betrayal. It was trust. "You are not punishing your mother, Harper," Dr. Reeves said during one particularly difficult session. "You are protecting yourself from people who have abused you emotionally for your entire life. There is nothing wrong with that." I started journaling as Dr. Reeves suggested, writing down memories from my childhood that I had buried for years. I wrote about being 8 years old and watching my mother fawn over Garrett while barely acknowledging my existence. I wrote about being 12 and overhearing her tell a friend that she had always wanted just one child and had never really bonded with me the way she had with Garrett. I wrote about being 16 and asking for help with college applications only to be told that college was not that important for girls because I would probably just get married anyway. Garrett, meanwhile, had been handed everything. His college tuition paid in full even after he failed out twice. His first car, his first apartment, his wedding costs, all funded by our parents while I worked 2 jobs to pay my own way through school. The pattern was undeniable once I let myself see it clearly. I had never been valued, I had never been wanted, and I had spent 3 decades trying to earn love that was never going to be freely given. The 30-day eviction notice period passed with my mother and Garrett making no effort whatsoever to pack or prepare to leave. I had expected resistance, but their complete defiance of the legal order still managed to surprise me. On day 31, I received a call from Douglas informing me that we needed to file a formal eviction lawsuit. Since they were refusing to vacate voluntarily, he had already prepared the paperwork and filed it with the court. My mother had hired her own attorney, a man named Lyle Brennan who apparently specialized in tenant rights cases. Douglas was not worried. "He is going to try every frivolous defense in the book," Douglas told me, "but none of them will work. She has no legal standing. This will be over in a few weeks." The court hearing was exactly as absurd as Douglas had predicted. Lyle Brennan stood before the judge arguing that my mother had a verbal promise from my father Roland that she could live in the house for the rest of her life. When the judge asked for any evidence of this promise, any witnesses or documentation, Lyle had nothing. My mother took the stand and tearfully claimed that Roland had told her many times that the house would always be her home. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Morrison, looked unimpressed. She asked my mother directly if she had any written agreement, any record of this promise, anything at all beyond her word. My mother insisted that a wife should not need paperwork to feel secure in her own home. Judge Morrison cut her off and said, "This is not your home, Mrs. Carlson. It belongs to your daughter. The will is clear. Your daughter has been generous in allowing you to stay rent-free for over a year. That generosity is now concluded. You have 14 days to vacate the premises or the sheriff will remove you." My mother stood up and screamed that the judge was corrupt, that this was a miscarriage of justice, that her own daughter was stealing from her. The bailiff had to escort her out of the courtroom while she continued shouting. Garrett, who had attended the hearing despite the restraining order requiring him to stay away from me specifically, glared at me with such hatred that I actually felt afraid. He mouthed something at me that looked like "You're going to pay for this" before following our mother out. Douglas patted my shoulder and said, "Congratulations. The eviction is now legally enforced. They will be removed by the county sheriff in 2 weeks." I decided to schedule a home inspection during that 2-week window to assess the property's condition for the upcoming sale. I wanted to know what repairs would be needed and what the house was truly worth in its current state. I coordinated with Simone the realtor and a professional home inspector named Marcus Hall. We scheduled the inspection for a Wednesday morning when I knew my mother usually went to her book club. I wanted to avoid another confrontation if possible, but what we found when we arrived at the house made confrontation the least of my concerns. The moment Marcus and I walked through the front door, I knew something was terribly wrong. The smell hit me first, a combination of mildew and something else I could not quite identify. Then I saw the walls, holes punched through the drywall in multiple rooms. Not accidental damage, deliberate destruction. Someone had taken a hammer or their fist to the walls and left gaping wounds in the structure of the house. The living room carpet, which had been pristine cream-colored wool, was now stained with what looked like red wine and coffee, ground in so deeply that no amount of cleaning would ever remove it. In the kitchen, cabinet doors hung off their hinges. Someone had literally torn them partially off the frames. Drawers were smashed. The beautiful granite countertops had scratches gouged into them as if someone had taken a metal tool and deliberately scraped away the surface. Marcus walked through methodically, documenting everything with his camera and taking notes. In the bathrooms, I found fixtures damaged. The vintage clawfoot tub in the main bathroom had scratches all along the porcelain. The toilet in the guest bathroom had a crack in the tank. Faucets had been wrenched partially off the sinks. It was systematic destruction, carefully calculated to cause maximum damage while still being explainable as accidents if challenged. But this was no accident. This was revenge. This was my mother and brother destroying what they could not have so that I could not have it either. Marcus estimated the repair costs at roughly $30,000 at minimum, possibly more depending on what he found when he looked deeper into the mechanical systems. I stood in the middle of the destroyed living room and called the police. I explained that I was the property owner, that the current occupants were being evicted, and that they had deliberately damaged the property. The officer who took my report was sympathetic but unhelpful. Since they are still legal residents for another week, this is technically a civil matter rather than criminal vandalism, he explained. You will need to sue them for damages through civil court after they are removed. I wanted to scream. They had destroyed $30,000 worth of my property, and there would be no immediate consequences. I called Douglas next, and he was furious on my behalf. Document everything with photos and video. He instructed. Get multiple contractor estimates for repairs. We will add this to the lawsuit for damages after the eviction is complete. They are not going to get away with this. Simone the realtor looked around at the destruction and sighed. We have two options, she said. We can sell the house as is, and discount the price to account for needed repairs, which means you will lose money. Or we can fix everything first, which will delay the sale but get you full market value. I did not even have to think about it. I would fix the house. I would restore it to beauty. And I would make my mother and Garrett pay for every single penny of damage they had caused. I hired contractors that same afternoon and authorized them to begin work as soon as the eviction was completed. But the sabotage was not finished. Garrett, apparently furious about the court-ordered eviction, decided to escalate his harassment campaign. He showed up at my workplace, a boutique architectural consulting firm in downtown Portland. I was in a meeting with a client when our receptionist buzzed my office to say there was a disturbance in the lobby. I excused myself and walked out to find Garrett standing in our sleek modern lobby, disheveled and clearly drunk even though it was 11 in the morning. The moment he saw me, he started shouting, "There she is, my sister, the thief, She is stealing from our family. She forced my mother out of her home. Other people in the lobby, including clients waiting for meetings, turned to stare. My boss, Kenneth Torres, appeared from his office, took one look at the situation, and immediately called building security. 2 guards arrived within minutes and escorted Garrett out while he continued screaming threats and accusations. Kenneth pulled me into his office after and asked if I was okay, if I needed time off to deal with this situation. I was mortified. My personal drama had invaded my professional life, and I could see the concern in Kenneth's eyes. I assured him I was handling it, that this would not happen again, that I was so sorry for the disruption. He waved off my apologies and said, "Family can be complicated. Just take care of yourself, Harper, and let us know if you need any support." The kindness in his voice made me want to cry, but I held it together until I was back in my own office with the door closed. The public smear campaign intensified as the eviction date approached. Cousin Diane created a Facebook group called Justice for Patricia Carlson and posted a long manifesto about how I was a greedy daughter who had manipulated my dying father into changing his will. She claimed, with absolutely no evidence, that I had forced Roland to leave everything to me by threatening to cut him off from seeing me. She said I was now stealing my mother's inheritance and leaving her homeless in her old age. The post was filled with lies, but it did not matter. Truth is irrelevant when the story is compelling enough. The group gained members rapidly. 100 people within the first day, 200 by the end of the week. Extended family members I barely knew, family friends from my parents' social circles. Even some of my mother's co-workers joined and contributed their own stories about what a terrible person I was. Former family friends unfriended me on social media. People I had known my entire life blocked me. I watched my social circle within the extended family evaporate as the narrative Diane had created spread and solidified into accepted truth. Harper was the villain. Patricia was the victim. Never mind that Harper owned the house legally. Never mind that Patricia had excluded Harper from a family reunion at Harper's own property. Never mind any of the actual facts. The emotional story was what mattered, and Diane had crafted it perfectly to paint me as the worst kind of monster. But I was not completely alone. Sloane organized what she called Team Harper, rallying my close friends to show support. They posted messages of encouragement, offered to help with the move once the house was vacant, and reminded me constantly that I was doing the right thing. One of my colleagues, Marcus Vance, shared his own story of family estrangement during a coffee break. He told me about cutting off his toxic parents 10 years ago and how it had been the best decision of his life. "The people who truly know you will see the truth," he said. "The ones who believe lies without asking for your side of the story were never really your people anyway." His words helped more than he probably knew. Dr. Reeves told me something similar during our next session. "You are not losing family right now, Harper. You are discovering who your real family is, and it is not the people who share your DNA. It is the people who show up for you when things are hard." The day of the court-enforced eviction arrived with gray skies and light rain, which felt appropriate for the occasion. Douglas had coordinated with the county sheriff's office to have deputies present to physically remove my mother and Garrett if necessary. I met the sheriff and his 2 deputies at the house at 9 in the morning. We knocked on the door and waited. No answer. We knocked again, louder. Finally, Garrett opened the door looking like he had not slept in days, his eyes bloodshot, his clothes wrinkled and stained. He stared at the sheriff and then at me with such pure hatred that I actually stepped back. "You have been ordered by the court to vacate these premises," the sheriff said formally. "You have until noon today to remove your personal belongings. After that, anything remaining on the property will be considered abandoned and will be disposed of." Garrett started to argue, but the sheriff cut him off. "Sir, this is not a negotiation. You can leave voluntarily, or you can be escorted out. Those are your only two options." Garrett turned and walked back into the house, leaving the door open. We heard him shouting for our mother. Patricia appeared a moment later, and the theatrical performance I had been expecting began in earnest. My mother threw herself on the floor in the entryway and started wailing that she could not leave, that this was her home, that I was murdering her by forcing her out. She literally laid down and refused to move. The sheriff looked at me with an expression that said he had seen this exact scenario 100 times before. He gestured to his deputies, who approached my mother and explained that if she did not stand up and leave voluntarily, they would physically carry her out. She screamed that they were assaulting an elderly woman, that she was going to sue everyone, that this was elder abuse. Meanwhile, Garrett was filming everything on his phone, clearly planning to post it online as proof of my cruelty. Neighbors had gathered on the street to watch. Some of them knew me from childhood, had known my family for decades. They stood on their lawns and porches, some recording on their phones, others just watching with expressions ranging from sympathy to judgment. I felt the weight of their stares and wanted to disappear. One of the deputies, a younger man who looked barely out of the police academy, actually looked sorry for me. He gave me a small nod as if to say he understood this was not easy. The other deputy, an older woman with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, had zero patience for my mother's dramatics. "Ma'am, you need to stand up right now," she said in a voice that brooked no argument. "I am giving you to the count of 3. When my mother refused to stand even after the count of 3, the deputies physically lifted her and escorted her out the door. She went limp, forcing them to carry her, screaming the entire time about injustice and cruelty. Patricia managed to twist around to look directly at me and shouted, "I hope you burn in hell for this. You hear me, Harper? I hope you burn." Her face was red and twisted with rage and genuine hatred. This was not an act. She truly hated me in that moment, maybe had always hated me and was only now free to show it. Garrett followed behind her, still filming, and as he passed me on the front steps he spat in my direction. The spittle landed on the step near my foot. "You are dead to us," he said, his voice low and venomous. I looked him directly in the eyes and said, "The feeling is mutual, Garrett." The sheriff and his deputies ensured that both my mother and Garrett were off the property, then handed me the official eviction documentation showing that the court order had been successfully executed. They left, and I stood alone in the doorway of the now vacant house. The silence after so much screaming felt overwhelming. I walked through the rooms slowly, seeing the damage in full daylight now that they were gone. It was worse than I had realized during the inspection. They had escalated the destruction in their final days, putting holes in more walls, breaking more fixtures, grinding dirt and stains into every carpet they could find. The repair estimate was going to go up significantly. But then something caught my eye as I descended into the basement, an area I rarely visited because my father had used it primarily for storage. Tucked behind an old bookshelf that had been moved slightly out of place, I found a cardboard box labeled in my father's handwriting, "Roland's personal papers." My heart started pounding. I pulled the box out and sat down right there on the basement floor to open it. Inside were manila folders, notebooks, and a large envelope with my name written across the front. I opened the envelope with shaking hands and found a letter addressed to me in my father's familiar script. "My dearest Harper," the letter began, "If you are reading this, things went as I feared they would. Your mother has likely fought you over the house. Garrett has likely shown his true colors. I want you to know that leaving everything to you was not a mistake or a moment of confusion. It was the most intentional decision I have ever made. I am sorry I did not have the courage to tell you this while I was alive, but I need you to understand the truth now." What followed was several pages that shattered and rebuilt my entire understanding of my family. My father explained that he had discovered my mother's affair 20 years earlier, shortly after Garrett was born. He had suspected even before that, because Garrett looked nothing like him and acted nothing like him. Roland had secretly gotten a DNA test done when Garrett was 2 years old. The results confirmed what he had feared. Garrett was not biologically his son. My mother had been sleeping with someone else, had gotten pregnant, and had passed the child off as Roland's. My father included a copy of the DNA test results in the box, faded but still legible, showing zero paternal match. He wrote that he had confronted Patricia with the evidence, and she had begged him not to leave her. She had sworn the affair was over, that she would be faithful from then on, that she was so sorry, and foolishly, as he put it, he had believed her. Roland stayed in the marriage primarily because of me. He did not want me to grow up in a broken home. He raised Garrett as his own son, despite knowing the truth, trying to love him equally, trying to be fair. But as Garrett grew older, the differences became impossible to ignore. Garrett had his biological father's temperament, angry and entitled and manipulative. Patricia spoiled him relentlessly, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps because Garrett was the child of the man she actually loved. My father watched his wife pour all her affection into a child who was not his while barely acknowledging the daughter who actually was. It broke his heart, he wrote, watching me try so hard to win my mother's approval, and never receiving it. In the years before his death, Roland had grown tired of the lies. He had started documenting everything in journals, writing down Patricia's behavior, Garrett's financial manipulation, the way they both treated me. He had planned to divorce Patricia and cut Garrett off completely. He had made an appointment with a divorce attorney for the week after he died. The heart attack took him before he could execute his plan, but he had made sure to change his will 6 months earlier, leaving everything to me because I was his true child in every sense that mattered. "You are my legacy, Harper," he wrote. "You are the best thing I ever did in this life. I am so proud of the woman you have become. Do not let your mother or Garrett convince you that you do not deserve what I have left you. You deserve so much more than I was able to give you while I was alive. Be free, my darling girl. Live the life you want without guilt. You owe them nothing." I sat on that basement floor and cried for an hour. I cried for my father who had lived with such a terrible secret for so long. I cried for myself, finally understanding why I had always felt like an outsider in my own family. I cried with relief that I was not crazy, that there had been a real reason for the differential treatment I received. And I cried with gratitude that my father had seen me, had valued me, had tried in his final act to protect me and set me free. This letter, these documents, they were not just information, they were validation, they were permission. They were my father telling me from beyond the grave that I was right to protect what he had given me. The box contained more than just the letter. There were journals dating back 15 years, pages and pages of my father's thoughts and observations. He wrote about Patricia's coldness toward him after he confronted her about the affair. He wrote about Garrett's entitlement and how Patricia encouraged it. He wrote about catching Garrett stealing money from his wallet and Patricia making excuses for it. He wrote about business irregularities he had discovered, evidence that Garrett was embezzling from the family company Roland had built. There were bank statements showing large transfers to Patricia's private account, money she had taken from their joint accounts without telling him. Financial records proving what I had always suspected. They were both users, both manipulators, both willing to lie and steal to get what they wanted. My father had been building a case not just for divorce but potentially for criminal charges against Garrett for embezzlement. He had documentation, witness statements from employees who had seen Garrett's theft, everything organized and ready to hand over to authorities. But then he died, and it all became moot, until now. I gathered all the documents back into the box and carried it upstairs. This evidence was ammunition. This truth was power. And I was going to use it. Armed with the documentation my father had left me, I scheduled an emergency meeting with Douglas. I brought the entire box and watched his eyes widen as I showed him the contents. The DNA test, the affair, the embezzlement evidence, the financial theft. All of it documented in my father's meticulous handwriting and supporting papers. Douglas sat back in his chair and said, "Harper, this changes everything. With this evidence, you could pursue criminal charges against Garrett for embezzlement. You could sue your mother for the money she stole from joint accounts. You have them completely cornered." I filed a civil lawsuit that afternoon against both Patricia and Garrett for property damages totaling $75,000. That figure included the repairs to the house, my legal fees, and compensation for emotional distress. Douglas assured me we had an airtight case with all the documentation of damage, the photos, the videos, and witness statements from the contractor and home inspector. I also filed for permanent restraining orders against both of them, citing Garrett's harassment at my workplace and my condo, and my mother's threats during the eviction. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. But the lawsuit was only part of my counterattack. I had reached my breaking point with the public narrative Diane had created. Her Facebook group Justice for Patricia Carlson had grown to over 1,500 members. They were posting daily about what a horrible person I was, sharing the edited video Garrett had taken of the eviction with commentary about how I had brutalized my poor elderly mother. The lies had spread so far and so wide that people I did not even know were sending me hate messages. Former coworkers from jobs I had held years ago were unfriending me based on the stories they had heard. I was being convicted in the court of public opinion without ever having the chance to tell my side. So I decided to tell it. All of it. I spent an entire evening writing out a detailed post explaining what had actually happened. I included photos of the property damage with timestamps. I included screenshots of the eviction notice and the court order. I included redacted excerpts from my father's letter, the parts where he explained why he left everything to me, and his concerns about Patricia and Garrett's behavior. I did not include the DNA test results or the information about the affair because that felt too private, but I included enough to show that my father had made his decision deliberately and for documented reasons. I included the screenshot of the forged loan documents Garrett had attempted to use. I laid out the timeline clearly. The inheritance, the verbal agreement to let my mother stay, the family reunion I was excluded from, the destruction of my property, the harassment and threats. I posted everything to my personal Facebook page with a lengthy introduction. I have stayed silent while lies have been spread about me. I have let people who do not know the full story judge me based on manipulated information. I am done being silent. Here is what actually happened. I hit post and then sat back and waited to see what would happen. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The post was shared dozens of times within the first hour. Extended family members who had initially believed Patricia's version started commenting with apologies. Aunt Lorraine sent me a private message saying, "I had no idea, Harper. Patricia told us you manipulated your father and stole her inheritance. I am so sorry I believed her without talking to you first." Uncle Marshall texted me directly. "Your mother lied to all of us. I owe you a huge apology. Please forgive me for how I treated you." The post went viral beyond just family circles. Friends of friends shared it. Local Portland community groups picked it up. By the next morning, it had been shared over 8,000 times. Strangers were commenting with support, sharing their own stories of family betrayal and toxic relatives. People who had been in the Justice for Patricia group started leaving it and apologizing to me publicly. Diane, seeing the tide turn against her narrative, panicked and deleted the entire group. But the internet never forgets, and multiple people had taken screenshots of her lies before the deletion. They posted those screenshots under my truth-telling post, showing exactly what kind of false narrative had been spread about me. Some family members, of course, still sided with Patricia. A few cousins who had always been close to my mother doubled down, calling me heartless and cruel no matter what evidence I presented. But the vast majority, especially those who actually knew me personally rather than just through family gossip, reached out to express support and apologize for believing lies. The shift in public perception felt vindicating but also sad. It should not have required me to publicly air my family's dirty laundry to be believed. But sometimes the truth only matters when it is loud enough to drown out the lies. Patricia's response to my post was predictable. She attempted to blackmail me, sending me a series of threatening text messages saying that if I did not delete the post and drop the lawsuit, she would spread lies about me to my professional contacts. She claimed she had dirt on me that would destroy my career. I screenshot all the threats and forwarded them to Douglas, who immediately sent her a cease and desist letter. When that did not stop her, she showed up at the office building where my therapist Dr. Reeves worked. She did not know which suite number, so she wandered the halls, asking office staff if they knew where Harper Carlson received therapy. Building security was called, and she was escorted out and banned from the property. Her desperation was showing, and it was not a good look. Garrett's situation got even worse. Already on probation for violating the restraining order after showing up drunk at my workplace, he was arrested again for driving past my condo building repeatedly while intoxicated. The police had been called by my building's security guard Frank after Garrett made 3 slow passes by the building in 1 hour, clearly looking for me. They pulled him over 2 blocks away and found his blood alcohol level was twice the legal limit. He spent the night in jail and faced additional charges for violating the restraining order a second time. His attorney warned him that a third violation would result in actual jail time beyond just overnight holding. While all the legal and public battles raged, the contractors were working on repairing the house. The damage turned out to be even more extensive than initially assessed. In addition to the visible destruction of walls, carpets, and fixtures, they discovered that copper piping had been stolen from behind walls in the basement. Copper theft is common because the metal can be sold for good money, and apparently Garrett had decided to strip what he could before leaving. The appliances had been deliberately sabotaged, wiring cut and components smashed. The final repair bill came to $60,000, double the original estimate. Douglas added the increased amount to the lawsuit. The contractors worked for 6 full weeks, and I visited the property almost daily to check on progress. Watching the house transform from the wounded, broken thing my mother and Garrett had left behind into something beautiful again felt therapeutic. New drywall went up smooth and perfect. Fresh paint in soft neutrals made every room feel bright and welcoming. The carpets were replaced with high-quality hardwood flooring that would appeal to buyers. New fixtures in the bathrooms and kitchen gleamed. The contractors even fixed some issues that had existed before the sabotage. Things my father had let slide in his final years. By the time they finished, the house looked better than it had in a decade. Simone the realtor came for a final walkthrough, and her eyes lit up. "Harper, this is gorgeous. We are going to list this at $2.3 million, and I fully expect to get more than asking price. The market is still hot, and this house is going to generate serious interest." We scheduled professional photography for the following week, and Simone brought in a staging company to furnish the empty rooms with carefully selected pieces that would help potential buyers envision themselves living there. The transformation was complete. This house that had been the site of so much pain and betrayal was now just a beautiful property ready for a new family to make it their home. The house went on the market on a Thursday morning, and by that afternoon we had 5 showing requests scheduled. The weekend brought open houses that attracted dozens of potential buyers. Families walked through admiring the original craftsman details, the updated kitchen, the spacious backyard. Young couples pointed out features they loved and discussed making offers. The energy was exciting and also bittersweet. This had been my childhood home, and despite everything that happened, there were good memories here too. Memories of my father teaching me to garden in the backyard. Memories of reading in the window seat on rainy afternoons. I was letting go of the past, both the good and the bad, and that felt necessary but not easy. By Monday morning, Simone called me with amazing news. We had received 12 offers, several of them well above the asking price. A bidding war had developed between three particularly interested parties. By Wednesday, the winning bid came in at $2.4 million, $300,000 over our asking price. The buyers were a young family relocating from California for work, and they had fallen in love with the house. They wanted to close in 45 days and were paying cash, which meant no financing contingencies to worry about. Everything was moving forward perfectly. Except Patricia was not done fighting. She hired yet another attorney, her third, who filed an emergency motion claiming that my mother had an equitable interest in the property based on her 30 years of residence and contributions to its upkeep. It was a desperate Hail Mary attempt with no legal merit whatsoever. The judge who heard the motion was the same Judge Morrison who had granted the eviction, and she looked even less impressed this time. She cut Patricia's attorney off mid-argument and said, "Counselor, your client has zero legal standing. The property belongs solely to Miss Carlson. Your client was evicted by court order. This motion is frivolous and borders on harassment. It is denied. If you file another baseless motion, I will sanction you personally." Patricia, who was in the courtroom for the hearing, stood up and started screaming that the judge was corrupt, that everyone was conspiring against her, that she was a victim of a vast injustice. Judge Morrison had her held in contempt and escorted out by bailiffs. Patricia spent 4 hours in a holding cell before being released with a fine and a stern warning that any further outbursts would result in more serious consequences. I was not at the hearing myself, but Douglas described it to me with barely contained amusement. "Your mother is her own worst enemy," he said. "Every time she opens her mouth, she makes things worse for herself." Garrett, meanwhile, was spiraling in his own way. 3 nights before the scheduled closing, he was arrested for attempting to break into the house. A neighbor had called the police after seeing someone trying to jimmy open a basement window at 11 at night. The responding officers found Garrett drunk and in possession of burglary tools. He told them he had a right to be in the house because it was his family home, completely ignoring the fact that he had been legally evicted and had a restraining order preventing him from going near the property. He was charged with attempted burglary, being drunk in public, and violating a restraining order for the 3rd time. This time, the judge set his bail high and made it clear that if convicted, Garrett was facing actual prison time. The chaos surrounding my family reached a peak when Garrett, apparently having a complete breakdown, posted a rant on Facebook in a drunken rage. He wrote, and I quote from the screenshots people sent me, "Harper is not even Roland's real daughter anyway. She has no right to anything. The whole family is built on lies." He was apparently trying to claim that I was not biologically related to my father, which was absurd and easily disproven. But what his drunken post actually did was confuse everyone because he got the story backward. Family members who knew nothing about the affair or the DNA test started asking questions. What did Garrett mean? What lies? People tagged Patricia in the comments asking for clarification. I decided it was time to end the speculation with truth. I made another post, this one shorter and more pointed, with copies of the DNA test my father had kept. I explained that my father had discovered that Garrett was not biologically his son. that my mother had had an affair, and that Roland had known the truth for decades. I explained that this was why my father had made the decisions he made in his will, leaving everything to his actual biological child rather than to the son of his wife's affair partner. The revelation exploded across social media. Patricia's carefully constructed victim narrative completely collapsed. Extended family members were shocked. Her friends from church and her social clubs were scandalized. The affair, which she had hidden successfully for over 3 decades, was now public knowledge. Patricia's reputation was destroyed permanently. People who had felt sorry for her now looked at her with judgment and disgust. She had lied to her husband for 30 years. She had let him raise another man's child while treating his actual daughter like garbage. She had tried to steal the inheritance Roland had left to me. Every piece of sympathy she had cultivated evaporated overnight. Some relatives reached out to say they finally understood why my father had made the choices he did, and they supported me completely. Patricia went into hiding, so to speak, deleting her social media accounts and refusing to answer calls or messages from anyone. The day before closing, I was in my condo reviewing the final paperwork when my building's front desk called up. "Miss Carlson, there is a Patricia Carlson here to see you. She says she is your mother." My stomach dropped. I asked security to tell her I was not available, but the desk guard came back and said she was refusing to leave and was causing a scene in the lobby. I remembered what Sloan had said about needing closure, about needing to stand up for myself one final time. I told security I would come down, but to please stay present in case the situation escalated. I rode the elevator down to the lobby with my heart pounding. When the doors opened, I saw my mother sitting on one of the modern chairs in the waiting area. She looked awful. She had aged what seemed like 10 years in the past few months. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, her face drawn and exhausted. When she saw me, she stood up quickly and I instinctively took a step back. But she did not approach aggressively. Instead, she just stood there looking at me with an expression I could not quite read. The security guard Frank positioned himself nearby, ready to intervene if needed. "Please," my mother said, and her voice cracked. "Please don't do this. I have nowhere to go. Garrett and I are living in his apartment and it's awful and I have no money and I am begging you, Harper, please don't sell the house. Let me come back, I'll pay rent, I'll do whatever you want, just please." Tears were running down her face and part of me, the part that had spent 32 years trying to earn her love, wanted to cave, wanted to make it better, wanted to be the good daughter who saved her mother. But I thought about the reunion I was excluded from. I thought about the $50,000 in damage she helped cause. I thought about the lies she had told and the pain she had inflicted, and the years of favoritism that had left me feeling worthless. "You had a year of free housing, Mom," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You threw a party in my house without inviting me. You destroyed $50,000 worth of my property. You tried to steal my inheritance multiple times. You lied about me to our entire family. You excluded me, humiliated me, and treated me like I was nothing my entire life." My mother started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. "I am not finished. You favored Garrett over me since the day he was born. You made me feel unwanted in my own family. Dad knew the truth. He knew Garrett was not his son. He knew about your affair. And he still tried to love Garrett, tried to be fair, but you poisoned that relationship with your lies and your manipulation. I'm your mother," Patricia said, her voice rising with desperation. I shook my head. "You were never a mother to me. You were Garrett's mother. I was just the unwanted daughter you tolerated because Dad insisted. Well, Dad is gone now, and I don't have to tolerate anything anymore." My mother's face shifted from pleading to anger in an instant, showing me the truth beneath the performance. "Fine," she hissed. "But you'll regret this. Blood is blood, Harper. You can't escape that. Someday you will be alone and you will realize what you threw away. I looked at her and felt nothing but pity and relief. Pity for how she had destroyed her own life with her choices. Relief that I would never have to deal with her again. According to you and Garrett, I'm not blood anyway, since you spent years claiming Garrett was the real child and I was somehow less than, I said. So by your own logic, we are not family. We are done, Patricia. After tomorrow, I will sign papers transferring ownership of that house to someone else. I will take my money, and I will build a life that has nothing to do with you or Garrett. And for the first time in my life, I will be free. Your father would be ashamed of you, she said, playing her final card, the guilt trip that had worked so many times before. But not anymore. I have his letters, I said calmly. I know exactly what he thought. He was proud of me, Patricia. He wanted me to have that house. He wanted me to be free of you and Garrett. He said so in his own words. So no, he would not be ashamed. He would be relieved that I finally stood up for myself. I turned to walk away and then stopped, looking back at her one more time. Goodbye, Patricia. I genuinely hope you find peace someday. But I'm done sacrificing mine to make you comfortable. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button. Behind me, I could hear her screaming threats, telling me I would regret this, that she would make me pay somehow. Frank was already escorting her toward the door, his voice calm but firm as he told her she needed to leave and that she was no longer welcome in the building. The elevator doors closed, cutting off the sound of her voice, and I rode back up to my floor feeling lighter than I had in months. That was the last time I ever saw my mother. The closing took place the next day at a title company's office in downtown Portland. I sat at a long conference table with Douglas on one side and Simone on the other, signing paper after paper transferring ownership of the house to the buyers. A lovely couple named Emma and David Chen, with 2 young children who were thrilled to have found their dream home. The final signature felt momentous, the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. The title company representative handed me a check for $2.4 million, and I stared at it feeling surreal. After paying off the remaining mortgage balance of $300,000, my legal fees of $50,000, and the $60,000 in repair costs, I was left with a net profit of $1,900,000. I deposited the check that same afternoon and then did something I had been planning for weeks. I took a month off work, the longest vacation I had taken since starting my career. I bought a ticket to Italy and spent 4 weeks traveling alone through Tuscany and Umbria, staying in small villages, eating amazing food, and processing everything that had happened. I brought my father's letters with me and read them over and over in outdoor cafes and on train rides between cities. I journaled extensively, working through 32 years of manipulation and emotional abuse, and finally beginning to heal. I let myself feel all the grief I had been holding back, grief for the family I had wanted but never had, grief for my father who had tried to protect me even in death, grief for the little girl I had been who spent so long thinking she was not good enough. But I also felt liberation. For the first time in my life, I had complete freedom. I had no one to answer to, no one to please, no toxic relatives demanding my time or energy or money. I could make choices based purely on what I wanted rather than what others expected. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. In a small town called Montepulciano, I sat at a restaurant overlooking rolling hills of vineyards and realized I was genuinely happy. Not happy because something good had happened, but happy as a baseline state of being. It was a feeling I barely recognized because I had been so unhappy for so long without even fully realizing it. When I returned home to Portland, I made more changes. I used the money wisely. investing $1.5 million in a diversified portfolio that would grow over time and provide long-term financial security. I bought a beautiful modern condo outright for $400,000, a bright airy space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. No mortgage, no debt, just a home that was completely mine. I kept $100,000 liquid for living expenses and the freedom to make choices without financial stress. And then I did something I had been thinking about for years but had never had the courage to do. I quit my job at the architecture firm and started my own consulting business. I could afford to be selective about clients and projects, taking only work that genuinely interested me and aligning with my values. The aftermath with my family played out in predictable ways. Patricia and Garrett's relationship deteriorated quickly once they were living together in his cramped apartment with no money and no prospects. Garrett blamed Patricia for losing the inheritance, conveniently forgetting that he was the one who had committed fraud and destroyed property and violated restraining orders. Patricia blamed Garrett for being a useless son who could not support her in her old age. They turned on each other the way toxic people always do when there is no one else left to abuse. I heard through the few family members I still spoke to that they were miserable together, but too proud or too broke to separate. Aunt Lorraine and Uncle Marshall reached out tentatively, asking if we could rebuild our relationship. I met with them for coffee and laid out my terms. I would allow them back into my life on a limited basis, but trust would have to be earned over time. They could not mention Patricia or Garrett to me. They could not try to guilt me into reconciling with them. If they crossed those boundaries, I would cut contact immediately. To their credit, they agreed and have actually honored those terms. We have a polite but distant relationship now, nothing like the closeness we had when I was a child, but civil and occasionally pleasant. Some cousins apologized sincerely, and I accepted their apologies while maintaining healthy distance. Others never reached out, and I was fine with that. The trash had taken itself out, as Sloane liked to say. Diane never apologized. She quietly slipped away from the situation once her lies were exposed, deleting her social media presence entirely and avoiding family gatherings where she might run into me. I did not care anymore. Her opinion of me had no power once I stopped giving it any weight. The family members who truly mattered, the ones who had taken the time to hear my side and support me, remained in my life. The rest faded away and I let them go without regret. I continued therapy with Dr. Reeves, working through the realization that I had been the scapegoat child in a deeply dysfunctional family dynamic. She helped me understand the patterns of narcissistic family systems, where one child is idealized and can do no wrong while the other is blamed for everything and can never do anything right. Understanding the pattern did not erase the pain, but it did help me stop taking it personally. It was not about me being defective or unlovable. It was about my mother's inability to be a healthy parent and her choice to project all her dysfunction onto me while treating Garrett like her golden child. That understanding brought enormous peace. I started dating again after years of avoiding relationships because I had been too emotionally exhausted from dealing with my family drama. I met someone, a kind and stable person who came from a loving family and who treated me with respect and care. It was revolutionary to be with someone who valued me without me having to perform or prove my worth constantly. My chosen family expanded to include Sloane, my new partner, a few close colleagues who had become genuine friends, and the relatives who had proven themselves trustworthy. I learned what healthy love actually looked like, and it bore no resemblance to what I had experienced growing up. 1 year after selling the house, I visited my father's grave on the anniversary of his death. I brought fresh flowers, his favorite yellow roses, and I sat on the grass beside his headstone for a long time. I read his letter out loud one more time, the words I had memorized but still needed to hear. "Thank you, Dad," I said when I finished. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for valuing me. Thank you for giving me the tools to break free. I know now that the house was not the real gift. The real gift was permission to choose myself, to protect myself, to build a life where I am not just tolerated but celebrated. I hope wherever you are, you can see that I am finally happy. I am finally free, and it is because of you. Sitting there in the quiet cemetery, I reflected on everything I had learned. Family, I realized, is not really about blood or DNA or shared last names. It is about respect and love and reciprocity. It is about people who show up for you not just when it is convenient but when it is hard. My mother and brother taught me what I absolutely do not want to be. They taught me how cruelty disguises itself as family loyalty, how manipulation hides behind tears and guilt trips, how some people will destroy what they cannot control. Those were valuable lessons, even if they were painful to learn. My father taught me that I deserved better, that my worth was not determined by whether toxic people recognized it, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone go free. Selling that house was not revenge, though it probably looked that way from the outside. It was liberation. It was me finally choosing myself after a lifetime of putting everyone else first. My mother and brother held a family reunion without me, deliberately excluding me from my own property to teach me a lesson about my place in the family hierarchy. So I sold the $2.1 million house, took the money, cut them off completely, and built a life where I am not just invited but celebrated. It was the best decision I ever made. Now I live in my beautiful condo overlooking the river. I work on projects I love with clients I choose. I spend time with people who genuinely care about me. I travel when I want. I make decisions based on what will make me happy rather than what will please others. I am building the kind of life my father wanted for me, free from the toxicity that poisoned so much of my childhood and early adulthood. I still have hard days when the grief sneaks up on me, when I mourn the family I wish I had instead of the one I got. But those days are getting fewer and further between, replaced by peace and contentment, and genuine joy. The final thing I learned through all of this is that the best family reunion is the one you build yourself, with people who actually want you there. Not people who tolerate you or who make you earn your place or who punish you for existing. People who see your value and celebrate it. People who support you when things are hard. People who show up without conditions or manipulation. That is the family I have now, the family I chose, and it is worth more than any inheritance or any blood connection could ever be. My mother and brother can keep their bitterness and their blame and their twisted version of family loyalty. I will take my freedom and my peace and my chosen family any day, because it turns out, when you stop trying to force people to love you and start investing in people who already do, your whole world transforms. So here I am now, happy and free and surrounded by real love. The kind of love that does not require me to be smaller or quieter or less than I am. The kind of love that celebrates my success instead of resenting it. The kind of love that my father wanted for me all along. And from where I stand now, looking back at everything that happened, I can honestly say I would not change a thing. Because all of it, every betrayal and every painful moment and every hard decision, led me here, to this life, to this peace, to this freedom. And that makes every single struggle worth it. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect yourself? Have you ever been excluded or betrayed by people who were supposed to love you? Drop a comment below and share your story. If this resonated with you, hit that like button to let me know. Make sure to subscribe for more real stories about navigating difficult family dynamics and choosing yourself when necessary. And share this with anyone who needs to hear that it is okay to walk away from people who hurt you, even if they are family. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there who is struggling with similar choices. Remember, you deserve to be celebrated, not just tolerated. You deserve peace, And sometimes, getting there means making really hard choices that other people will not understand. But your well-being is worth it. You are worth it. Take care of yourselves out there, and I will see you in the next one.